Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Half History Will Travel. I'm your host, the Wilder historian, Dr. Lucas Wilder, and last time the war came to an end and Beauregard returned to Louisiana. Now we find out about his post-war life and Reconstruction. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, and purchase something from one of my online stores. Every little bit helps. Thank you. The post-war world that Beauregard and other ex-Confederates were thrust into following their surrender was precarious. A Confederate of his rank wasn't given a pardon automatically from the President. He would need to apply for a pardon from Andrew Johnson, the successor of Abraham Lincoln. Unsure about what he should do, and not wanting to make a decision until he learned of other commanders' decisions, he wrote to Joseph E. Johnston and Robert E. Lee. Both men outranked him in the Confederate Army. He asked what he should do. Both Lee and Johnston recommended that he should submit to the victors and to seek amnesty. On September 16, 1865, Beauregard appeared at City Hall and took the oath of allegiance to the United States. Then he wrote to Johnson, requesting a pardon. It read, "In taking up arms during the late struggle after my native state Louisiana had seceded, I believed in good faith that I was defending the constitutional rights of the South against the encroachments of the North. Having appealed to the arbitration of the sword which has gone against us, I accept the decision as settling finally the questions of secession and slavery, and I offer now my allegiance to the government of the United States, which I promised truly and faithfully to serve and uphold hereafter against all external or internal foes." Beauregard's family feared that he might be imprisoned, exiled, or executed for his role in the Confederacy. Some of Beauregard's and other generals' baggage were captured and examined to determine if any incriminating evidence existed, but as one of the examiners stated, most of Beauregard's letters were from female admirers. Beauregard is the veriest coxcomb, corresponding with scores of misses. In 1866, he started his journey of obtaining his lost property outside of Memphis, Tennessee. Before the war, he owned land on the city's outskirts, but the Freedmen's Bureau absorbed it because it was labeled abandoned land and built a black school on part of the property. An African-American village popped up on what was left of his land. He spent the next 2 years petitioning the government to restore the land to him, finally getting it back in 1868, when a mass amnesty went out from President Johnson. Despite his pardon, he still wasn't a citizen, so he got former Confederate General John B. Gordon to introduce a bill rescinding any restrictions on his citizenship. Through numerous petitions, he finally received his full citizenship in 1876. At various points after the war, foreign countries offered Beauregard positions in their armies. A Turkish principality offered him a position, as well as the Brazilian government. Beauregard was tempted by Brazil's offer, especially when the Republicans gained more power in the United States, but he ultimately decided to remain in the South. The closest Beauregard came to accepting a military position outside of the United States came when Egypt offered him at least $12,000 a year salary plus rations. Beauregard allegedly, tentatively, accepted the offer, but the Egyptian leader rescinded the offer when he was told that employing so many Confederates, and especially Beauregard, would insult the United States. But that is just one possibility of why Egypt rescinded the offer. A more likely cause came from Egypt being told to slow down their military preparation. Louisiana during Reconstruction irritated Beauregard, who witnessed the political roles reversed in his home state. Black suffrage became a critical element in the Republicans taking over the state. Beauregard, like many 19th century Americans, believed that African Americans were inferior to whites, but like former Confederate General James Longstreet, Beauregard agreed that if the Democrats could harness the black vote, that they could reverse their fortunes. He said so in speeches he made. However, his private feelings were more rebellious. He wrote to a friend, "Would that I could have said to my soldiers, resist, and hang out our banners on the outer walls, etc. But the day of retribution has not yet come when we shall be able to satiate our spirit of revenge on those fanatics and radicals of the North. Whenever it does, we shall make them drink of the poison chalice to the very dregs." At a vacation at White Sulphur Springs in 1868, Beauregard, along with Lee, former Confederate Vice President Alexander Stephens, and a host of other former Confederates, met with William S. Rosecrans, the former Union general and now campaigner for the presidential hopeful Horatio Seymour. Rosecrans wanted to enlist the help of ex-Confederates to address the argument that Southerners wouldn't deal justly with African Americans politically, an accusation thrust on them by the North. The result of the meeting was a document signed by Lee, Beauregard, and approximately 30 others, saying that the South accepted the results of the war and emancipation, and that it felt kindly toward African Americans, but was opposed to his exercising political power. It seemed that Beauregard was just going along with his fellow ex-Confederates, or he may have changed his mind, but in just a few short years, he would attempt to create a unification party to unify blacks and whites under a conservative banner, promising the African American community civil rights. Beauregard believed the best way to change the political landscape was to let the black community get voting rights and the whites to direct the black vote. The 100-man committee, with 50 whites and 50 blacks, headed by Beauregard, even pushed for desegregation of public services, including schools. Urban white Democrats knew to retake the state they would need the black vote, but they couldn't get the whites in rural areas to go along with them, which ultimately ended the unification efforts in Louisiana. It was an important moment in Reconstruction, but never got off the ground. Beauregard, when many ex-Confederates struggled to make money after the war, became wealthy. He worked for the New Orleans, Jackson, and Great Northern Railroad as chief engineer and general superintendent. The war ravaged that railroad and many others in the South. At the beginning of the war, the Jackson Railroad had 45 locomotives and hundreds of freight cars and other material. After the war, it had 4 locomotives and 36 assorted freight and baggage cars, losing 90% of its rolling stock. Its bondholders and investors, mostly Northern and European capitalists, threatened to end the company. The company made Beauregard the president of the Jackson Railroad and sent him on a mission to the North and Europe to convince the bondholders to continue with the company. His mission was a total success. With Beauregard's help, the railroad racked up $1.5 million in annual gross income and helped it expand. As one of Beauregard's biographers explained, for the progress that had been made, Beauregard could claim most of the credit. In a real sense, it was his railroad. When the company needed money in 1868, he was the man who went to New York and raised the required sum. He was happy in his work and proud of what he had accomplished. Writing to Lee, he said, "I have become such a railroad man that you would suppose, if you were to see me in my office or at work, that I had never done anything else all my life. Indeed, I took to it quite naturally." Unfortunately, he wouldn't run the railroad for long after its success. The Republican governor of Louisiana, knowing that the state and city of New Orleans held the majority of shares in the railroad, in a series of backroom deals with Northern investors, sold the company's stock out from under Beauregard for pennies on the dollar, replaced Beauregard's board of directors, and took over the company. It was a back-and-forth battle for the old general, as he even had the new investors arrested for trespassing when they came into his office. But it was no use. The governor and his associates won out. Beauregard was ousted. Happening at the same time as his presidency of the Jackson Railroad, he also took on the job of finding investors for and operating one of the street railroad systems in New Orleans, the New Orleans and Carrollton Railroad Company. Unbeknownst to him, his investors opened up a bank account in his name and overdrew the account by hundreds of thousands of dollars. When discovered, Beauregard worked hard to bring the company out and in better hands, which he did. Millions of people traveled on his street railroad. The stock jumped from $7.50 a share to $115 a share. The stockholders sought to oust Beauregard, believing they could run the business at a lower cost and make more money. They voted him out as president and installed a new board of directors as well. When silt began building up at the mouth of the Mississippi River, various men put forward plans to make river navigation permanent instead of having to dredge the rivers regularly. Beauregard signed off on the idea of putting in a canal because of his engineering skills, but when the famous bridge builder from St. Louis, James Eads, recommended simply narrowing the mouth to make the river more faster to prevent silt from building up, a debate ensued. Beauregard came out against Eads' idea. Eads, to help get a contract for narrowing the river's mouth, brought Beauregard over to his side through flattery and an opportunity to construct jetties. Beauregard came out in favor of Eads' idea and lobbied Washington to go along with his idea. Beauregard gained success in his many ventures, even though he was ousted in many cases, but his most lucrative job was on the horizon. the Louisiana State Lottery began operations and immediately became ingrained in New Orleans and Louisiana politics. The lottery owners used the vast amounts of money earned every year, sometimes upwards of $13 million profit, to grease the palms of politicians, to keep the lottery in the state and establish that company as a monopoly. They not only paid off politicians, but to stay in the public's good graces, they donated vast amounts of money to schools, hospitals, and other institutions needed around the state. The lottery drawings were done publicly, but even still the lottery received accusations of fraud, so they decided to bring on a Confederate general to stand on stage and oversee the drawings to make sure everything was legitimate. They asked Beauregard to be the overseer. The lottery also allowed him to choose the other overseer. He initially wanted Wade Hampton, the ex-Confederate cavalry commander, who said he would accept if he didn't win political office. He did, so he turned down Beauregard's offer. Beauregard then asked Jubal Early, the former Confederate lieutenant general, to be with him on stage, and he accepted. Both men made a lot of their income from this job, making somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000 a year, but the numbers have been estimated to be even higher. Like many former Confederates in the post-war period, Beauregard wanted to add his contribution to the Civil War story by writing for publications and eventually writing his own book, recounting his time in the war. He found that he was too busy and had trouble finishing his book, so he hired a ghostwriter to take his notes and about 2/3 of the book he had wrote and turn it into a book. However, Beauregard realized how it would look if he glorified his own accomplishments, so he allowed the ghostwriter to take total credit for the work. That work and others attacked Beauregard's wartime enemies, especially in response to their own published works. He jousted with Albert Sidney Johnston's son, who put together a biography of his father. Johnston's son gave his father the credit for putting the Battle of Shiloh together, and blamed Beauregard for losing all the advantage that his father had gained the first day. Beauregard found another foe in his old friend Joseph E. Johnston. Beauregard believed that Johnston gave himself too much credit for the First Battle of Manassas, so Beauregard tried to insert himself even more into the story of that battle. He even attacked Robert E. Lee, by this time becoming an iconic symbol. He wrote of Lee that, "I don't think he has much military foresight or prescience or great powers of deduction, but he had great nerve, coolness, and determination. The greater the danger, the greater was his presence of mind. Although not very fertile in resources or expedients, he is perhaps a little too cautious in civil as well as military matters, but he has a noble and high-toned character, but I don't think him capable of much generous friendship." It was Jefferson Davis who Beauregard threw most of his criticism at. They confronted each other on paper, in articles, and in their respective books. At the dedication of the Albert Sidney Johnston statue at the tomb of the Army of Tennessee in New Orleans, Beauregard begrudgingly sat on stage with Davis, who criticized Beauregard indirectly throughout the speech. When Davis died a few years later, Beauregard, one of the last full generals still alive, was asked to ride at the head of the procession. He turned down the offer. Writing to his family, he said, "I told them I would not do it. We have always been enemies. I cannot pretend I am sorry he is gone. I am no hypocrite." Beauregard kept busy in his post-war years. He became the adjutant general for the state of Louisiana, overseeing its militia, now the National Guard. During his time in that position, he prophesied that the new weapons technology would make battling in daytime too costly, and believed that most battles would happen at night. To combat this, he suggested that the soldiers be issued uniforms with phosphorescent backs so that commanders could see their men at night from behind, but to the enemy in front they would be invisible. The suggestion was not accepted. When Confederate General John Bell Hood passed away, along with his wife and one child in the yellow fever epidemic in 1879 in New Orleans, 10 of his children were made orphans. Beauregard worked to raise funds to support them and convinced one of his friends to adopt one of the children. He also worked to get Hood's book published. Beauregard failed to be elected to a position in his younger life, but in his older days, he was elected Commissioner of Public Works. He was thrilled to help clean up the city until he got into that position, and found that it was a political backwater, or patronage haven, where politicians appointed lowly or disreputable people who gave them support in elections. Beauregard attempted to clean up the bureaucracy, but was stopped by the politicians, who wanted to keep it as a place for their cronies. Beauregard resigned in disgust. In the summertime, Beauregard preferred to leave New Orleans because of the oppressive heat. He spent a great deal of time in West Virginia, at its springs, and in Asheville, North Carolina, even taking a trip to Wisconsin to avoid the summer climate of Louisiana. He claimed he had to unboil himself in the summertime. In February 1893, Beauregard became ill and confined to his bed. In a delirium, he began to call for massing his divisions and claimed, "We will rout the enemy tomorrow." He seemed to recover, and on February 20th, he woke up from a restless night, got dressed, and spent most of the day in the garden or on the balcony of the home. When he went to bed, he told his sons, "I will be well tomorrow if I sleep tonight." He went to bed with the nurses close at hand. At about 10 p.m., the nurses heard the death rattle coming from the old general, but before they could get the family, he had passed. Not wanting flowers at his funeral, a palm leaf tied with a purple ribbon adorned the room, and some examples of the battle flag he designed adorned his coffin. He laid in state in City Hall in New Orleans. The procession to the graveside saw Confederate veterans and countless mourners, chief among them being Edmund Kirby Smith, the last full general of the Confederacy still alive. Smith would pass away the next month. Pierre Gustav Toutant Beauregard takes a prominent role in Civil War history for its first full year. Then, in general, he fades to the background, taking on a role less talked about than the other generals who actively campaigned. It's no wonder that Jefferson Davis jumped at the chance to place Beauregard at the head of his forces opposing Fort Sumter in the spring of 1861. His reputation as an excellent engineer, competent soldier, and his unique Creole background allowed his legend to grow in this early part of the Confederacy's life. The hero of Fort Sumter became the hero of First Manassas, actively placing troops at the front, while the overall commander Joseph E. Johnston sent troops to him. However, his feud with Davis and the Confederate War Department resulted in him moving around the Confederacy, first to the west to help Albert Sidney Johnston, where he became commander of the army after that general's death at the Battle of Shiloh. Beauregard's vague reports to Davis about him leaving the army for rest without requesting leave gave Davis the impetus for relieving him from his position. Beauregard spent a great deal of the war as defender of Charleston, as well as the coast of Georgia and later Florida, but he always felt he should be on the front commanding armies, constantly wanting to return to his Army of Tennessee that he helped concentrate at Corinth, Mississippi in early 1862. He defended Charleston well, throwing back repeated attacks by Union forces, bent on capturing the symbol of the rebellion. He spent the last year of the war commanding troops around Petersburg and overseeing the Department of the West at the end of 1864. 1865 saw him helping his old superior Joseph E. Johnston as they battled Sherman as that general pushed through the Carolinas. He ended his Civil War career with his Army of Tennessee in North Carolina. Unlike many ex-Confederates, Beauregard became wealthy in his post-war years. He was a constant reminder of the Confederacy to visitors and residents of New Orleans as he walked down its streets. Though his military star dimmed after the war's opening acts, Beauregard remained a lasting symbol of the Confederacy's early hopes and enduring myths. In memory and in presence, he stood as a living relic of a cause lost, his legacy woven into the very streets of the city he called home. To many, he will always be the Napoleon in gray.